I wanted to start out by asking you about why it is that Africa is lagging behind other developing parts of the world, especially when it comes to reducing poverty and also on the points of hunger and nutrition. What is going on in Africa for it to be so far behind?
Well, the main reason Africa is off track in meeting the 2015 goals is that Africa started further behind. The poverty rate in Africa was about 59% in the mid-1990s, and that was as a result of very low economic growth in the past 15 years. Now, since the mid-1990s, actually Africa has been making the fastest progress of any region in the world. The poverty rate actually has been falling by 1 percentage point a year between 1995 and 2005. And child mortality rates, which were increasing mostly due to HIV/AIDS, have started to fall since 2000. So if you look at it a different way, Africa, because growth has accelerated since the 1990s, has actually been making faster progress and is on a roll to meet the goals, if not by 2015, soon thereafter.
You know, it's interesting you talk about progress, and in notes produced by the World Bank, you clearly, as you clearly say, there has been progress prior to what you call the triple blow of the fuel, food, and financial crises over the course of a couple years. When we look at the situation in Africa, are you actually saying that because of these crises, these external shocks, that progress was potentially even reversed? I mean, can we go as far as saying that? And are you basically blaming those external factors for an underperformance in Africa?
I wouldn't blame just those external factors, and as I said earlier, it's not underperformance. There's no question the food, fuel, and financial crises of 2008-9 slowed the progress. We estimate that about an additional 20 million people were thrown into poverty as a result of those crises. And that's mainly because economic growth, which had been accelerating before the crisis, slowed down. It was about 6% in 2007 and fell to 1% by 2009. But the important point is that actually growth has rebounded. This year we expect growth to be about 5% for Africa on average, which means that we can actually regain some of that momentum that was lost as a result of the crisis. And that was mainly because of decisions taken by African policymakers who continued with the prudent economic policies that delivered the growth for the previous decade through the crisis itself.
Let me ask you about some of the announcements that came out of the UN meeting, which was focusing on the Millennium Development Goals taking place this week in New York. I understand that the World Bank, along with other organizations, is pledging to focus on 35 countries that are particularly underachieving. Can you just tell us which of those countries are in Africa and what you actually mean by focusing on them? How are you actually, literally, physically redoubling the efforts, as Bob Zoellick said?
A good 20 of those countries are in Africa. Many of them happen to be either countries in conflict or coming out of conflict and fragile states. And those are the ones that are making the slowest progress. The way we are addressing them at the World Bank is to focus on some of the areas where additional emphasis can generate big gains in poverty reduction. One of the main ones is agriculture. 70% of the poor in Africa get their income from agriculture. So an emphasis on agriculture, we lend about over $1 billion a year now to agriculture. If we can increase the productivity, particularly of smallholder farmers, it can have a big impact on poverty. Another area which has been of great concern is maternal health. Far too many women are dying in childbirth in Africa. The maternal mortality rate has not been falling as fast as it should. And there, too, we are putting a great emphasis on improving the delivery of services to expectant mothers so that they would actually have safe childbirth.
Finally, Shanta, I want to just end on a positive note. There seems to be one area where there has been some clear improvement across the developing world, which is access to finance. I understand there's been a survey released showing that despite the economic uncertainties and the financial problems brought on by the financial crisis, there's more people who actually have access to finance. To what extent is this the case in Africa today?
Oh, it very much is a case in Africa as well, mostly because these are people at the very low end of the spectrum who were hardly affected by the global economic crisis because they don't trade in international securities. But really, the big story is at the micro level. And I think in Africa, you may have heard of the example in Kenya of mobile banking. Which has just taken off. We have something like 8 million customers in Kenya alone who are able to transfer funds by mobile phones. And this has permitted people in remote rural areas, often who normally had to travel long distances just to find a bank, to be able not only to transfer financial assets, but they were able to save more. And now we're seeing that the savings rates is picking up in some of these poor areas.
Shanta, thank you so much for your time today. Always a pleasure. Please do come and talk to us again really soon.
Okay, thank you for having me on.
Shanta Devarajan is the Africa Chief Economist from the World Bank, joining us from Washington, D.C.